Holy shiitake mushrooms, what the hell just happened? Damian Lillard is a member of the Milwaukee Bucks. What? It's crazy to even consider, because there was a little bit of noise that Milwaukee would get in on the sweepstakes, and seemingly they were the team that ended up winning this thing. So let's talk about the trade. I'm still baffled. All right, okay, so the official trade here is that the Milwaukee Bucks will be getting Damian Lillard. The Blazers will be getting Jrue Holiday, who they will reroute to a fourth team. DeAndre Ayton, Toumani Camara, who is the Suns rookie they picked this year. A 2029 first-round pick from the Bucks, and 2 Bucks pick swaps. The Suns are going to be getting Yusuf Nurkic, Nasir Little, Keon Johnson, and Grayson Allen. Lot to unpack there from a lot of different sides. We'll start with the Bucks side of things because it's the most pressing. Giannis Antetokounmpo applied an immense amount of pressure on the Bucks front office. He did the full court press to make sure they did something like this. And ladies and gentlemen, they went out and did it. They got him that star to help him compete. It's funny, if you go back and look at Giannis's comments over the last couple of weeks, I need them to know that I am fully committed to winning. I need to know that they're fully committed to winning. And by doing this, by trading for Damian Lillard, by trading Jrue Holiday, they are showing that they are fully committed to winning with Giannis Antetokounmpo, trying to win a championship right now. And ultimately, I think it does bring them closer to becoming contenders. They were already contenders going into this season with the team that they had, but now you add a guy in Damian Lillard who solves an immense amount of their offensive problems. The one glaring area of weakness for the Milwaukee Bucks was their half-court offense. The way that they sometimes look sluggish trying to figure out shots. They relied too much on Chris Middleton to be that shot creator for them, a tough shot creator for them. Jrue Holiday in the playoffs would struggle to create shots for them. Obviously, Giannis isn't this worldly, half-court offense. He's a great player, incredible. 2-time MVP. But adding Damian Lillard solves so much of their offensive problems because of the pull-up shooting, because of the pick-and-roll play with him and Giannis. You can already imagine how hard it would be to stop that. And then on the other side, I think from a defensive perspective, there are ways for the Bucks to look successful because of Brook Lopez, who was second in Defensive Player of the Year voting last season, because of Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is an incredible off-ball defender and roamer, because Chris Middleton, when he's healthy, can be a good perimeter defender. I'm still, especially with them letting go of Jrue Holiday, who was a first-team All-Defense member last year, Grayson Allen, who is a really, really good perimeter defender, and then adding Damian Lillard to the mix, who is not a good perimeter defender. I think that's the one flaw he's always had in his career. How that's going to work on the defensive end, big question for Bucks rookie head coach Adrian Griffin, who will have to figure this thing out and how it works pretty much on the fly. Media day is in a couple days, ladies and gentlemen. But at the same time, you can see just how good this team can potentially be. On the offensive end, Dame's pull-up shooting is going to ignite the half-court offense for this Bucks team. It's going to make them really, really hard to stop offensively. You can think of the pick-and-pop stuff with him and Brook Lopez. You can think of Giannis kind of rolling to the basket, 3-on-2 situations. He finds a shooter, bang. And I think ultimately the Bucks do have somewhat of a nucleus that makes sense for that style. You obviously take Jrue Holiday and Grayson Allen out of the equation, but you had Chris Middleton, who's hopefully healthy this season, Giannis, Brook Lopez, and then off of the bench, you have guys like Pat Connaughton, Jay Crowder, who is more of a question mark right now, Bobby Portis, who can stretch the floor a little bit for you, Malik Beasley, and then you're hoping to get contributions from a Marjon Beauchamp, from an AJ Green maybe. You know what I mean? Like, there's a world where this works incredibly well. Now, to be fair, by losing Jrue and Grayson, they're a little bit less deep, and I don't know how else they would maneuver to maybe reshore up their rotation, because they just gave up their picks. They don't have that much to kind of move around money-wise either. And I'm curious to see how they kind of angle that and kind of transition. But ultimately, the Bucks look like world beaters. You can think of 1,000,001 different options for why this is going to be incredibly successful in Milwaukee. And yes, if I had to pick right now, I think they're the favorites coming out of the East. All respect to Boston, all respect to what they have built this summer. I think, adding Kristaps Porzingis, it has its question marks, but ultimately they are doubling down on a style by adding Porzingis, and I think they're a very, very deep team. The one area where I think the Celtics actually have the Bucks outmatched is their depth. They have multiple options that they can go out to, and the Bucks don't necessarily have that. Now, to be fair, Dame is on contract for 3 more seasons. Multiple years of Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. The extension talks for Giannis go away. You assume that with Damian Lillard, who he's been trying to recruit for a very long time, that he will sign that extension. And now you have Dame and Giannis to build around. And in the summer, when the Bucks have access to more picks and more draft capital, they can go out and shore up their rotation even more. So even if they don't necessarily win this year because of their lack of depth, because of some of the question marks perimeter wise, you can see how good this team can be after a summer of retooling. That being said, even this year, they have a chance to win a championship. A very, very good chance of winning a championship. And there's going to be Boston, there's going to be Denver, there's going to be all these other teams. But ultimately, yeah, this is a title-worthy team, and it could be a title-worthy team for an extended period of time. They committed to Giannis. It's an incredible move by the Bucks. They went out and got their man. By the way, we'll talk about the Raptors and Heat angle after this. Okay, now when it comes to the third team in this process, which is the Phoenix Suns, I'm sort of bewildered by their... look, it just seems like they clearly wanted DeAndre Ayton to not be on this team anymore. That's essentially what it was, because Jusuf Nurkic is not the player that DeAndre Ayton is. He's not as young, obviously. I think Nurkic is near his 30s. And ultimately, he hasn't looked the same. Prime Nurkic, maybe you could say, okay, there's some comparables. The defense was elite at some point, but now it hasn't been the same. He's a little bit slow-footed as he's gotten older and as the injury tolls have kind of weared on him. And you sort of wonder, okay, 2018 number 1 overall pick DeAndre Ayton, for Jusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nasir Little, and Keon Johnson. And while Little and Keon Johnson are guys who, okay, they're younger prospects that you can look forward to. Grayson Allen is a guy who's going to play on the Suns rotation almost immediately. He's a good perimeter defender. He probably ends up being their 5th starter. But at the same time, I wonder if that's the right amount of value. Now, to be fair, the Suns just wanted to get rid of Ayton. That seems evident from this trade. But ultimately, I'm sort of curious about what's going to happen with the Suns and how they're building around Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. I think having Nurkic as your starting 5 is going to bring up a lot of defensive questions. And this team already had some defensive questions with Ayton in the fold. So I'm sort of curious to see how that works on the court. But not to mention, Frank Vogel is an incredible defensive coach. If there's any type of coach that can sort of figure this out, it's him. But I'm still sort of wary about how this looks. They need to be a good perimeter defense. They need to not allow paint touches and rim pressure, because otherwise it's going to leave Nurkic, kind of leave him high and dry, if you will. And I'm sort of curious to see how that looks. I'm not the biggest fan from the Suns' perspective. If I was a Suns fan, I would have probably wanted more for the guy I drafted number 1 only 4 years ago. But it's just, yeah, I'm not in love with it right now. I could see it working out, and I could see it coming to fruition in a way that kind of makes sense for the Suns team. But ultimately, you kind of leave yourself wanting a little bit more for Ayton. Now, to be fair, Ayton's value is at an all-time low. Had a horrible playoff ending last season. Just was a shell of himself. In Phoenix, his run had sort of ended. Okay, now from the Blazers side of things, you have to wait until you see what the Jrue Holiday deal ends up being. He's obviously going to get moved somewhere else, whether that is Miami, whether that is the Clippers, whether that's the Sixers, the Raptors, whoever it is that ends up getting Jrue Holiday. What you can expect as a return is most likely a couple of picks, some of them potentially unprotected, and maybe a younger player, a prospect, if you will, or another player that the Blazers can use in their rotation. That being said, I sort of question the deal from the Blazers' perspective. Now, to be fair, you understand the human element. You have to discuss the human element here. The Blazers, I don't want to say they wanted to do right by Dame. They wanted to find a good mix between doing right by Dame and also getting the best value they could. They obviously didn't like what Miami had to offer, and Miami's package with Tyler Hero, maybe Nikola Jovic, etc., just wasn't appealing to them. So therefore, they went to the next best team, which is the Milwaukee Bucks. And I think the human element played a big factor here, because you look at what the Blazers could have got from potentially the Raptors, and you say, and we'll talk about that in a second, and you say, well, there were better offers out there. There were definitely better offers out there. There's no question in my mind that the Raptors probably offered something a little bit better than this. But the reason that Dame is a Milwaukee Buck right now is the fact that they played into the human factor of this. Dame wanted to meet up with Giannis. Dame wanted to team up with Giannis. They both wanted to team up together, and now they have that in Milwaukee. That being said, I still feel like they could have got more for Dame, and it's going to be a hard pill to swallow regardless when you have DeAndre Ayton, whatever you get for Jrue Holiday, the 3 picks, plus Toumani Camara. And I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But regardless, I mean, depending on what they get for Jrue, it could be a good return for Jrue. It still feels like you needed a little bit more. Now, to be fair, you get DeAndre Ayton, former number 1 overall pick, 2018 number 1 overall pick, a very, controversial number 1 overall pick, if you will, who is at a low point in his value right now. And I think ultimately, if they can get the most out of him, if he can maybe be revitalized in Portland, I think there's a way for looking at this trade in hindsight and saying that it's a good one for Portland. Because Portland right now, even regardless of the Dame situation, they're in a very, very good spot. They have Scoot Henderson, they have Shaedon Sharpe, they have Anthony Simons, who they might be able to trade later on as well. Jeremy Grant, another player they could potentially trade. And now they have this core that they're building out, a pretty young core too, that includes Scoot, Shaedon Sharpe, Simons, and now Ayton. What happens with the rest of this group really just depends on how they're able to manage these assets, what they can get for Simons down the road, what they can get for Jeremy Grant down the road, what they can get for Jrue Holiday right now. And ultimately, I still like this deal from Portland's perspective because they get a guy like Ayton. And I understand people are really low on Ayton right now, especially Suns fans who just watched him botch another playoff series for them. I get it. I really, really do understand that the idea of Ayton is better than the reality of what DeAndre Ayton is. But ultimately, this is a guy that you can be able to sort of try and build around with those guards. You think of the actions that they can run with Scoot Henderson, pick and rolls that they could do, Shaedon Sharpe, and Ayton could do these second side actions as well. I could see a lot being churned out from Ayton in Portland. Maybe there is more of a leash for him to experiment and try these things that he wants to do offensively in Portland as well. And I think ultimately he has a defensive potential that was tapped into a little bit in Phoenix, and I was kind of curious to see how that would look with Frank Vogel, but I think he can do that in Portland as well. That being said, the deal for Portland's side probably leaves you with wanting a little bit more. Now, you never know what these picks can turn out to. The 2029 unprotected pick from Milwaukee is probably going to be a really, really good pick, because that is when Giannis is 6 years. It's 6 years from now, right? So Giannis is most likely gone. Damian Lillard is probably retired at that point. So you can see that 2029 pick is going to be really, really valuable. Same thing applies to those pick swaps in 2028 and 2030. Ultimately, the pick value makes a lot of sense for Portland's perspective. You add DeAndre Ayton, and then whatever you get for Jrue Holiday is a great return. I'm kind of just curious to see what happens with this Jrue situation, and we won't really be able to assess Portland's side until we do that. But that being said, given the circumstances, given how long this took, and given how drawn out it was, how much they quote-unquote wanted to do right by Dame while also, getting the best bang for their buck, I ultimately think it was a good deal for them. That being said, I'm still surprised that Toronto and Miami didn't do better, and this is where we'll talk about them. Okay, so from Miami's perspective, this has to be a failure. And I don't want to go out and get Heat fans really angered. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to make it so that you guys are just angered and riled up. But I'm just looking at it from the perspective of they went out and wanted to get Damian Lillard. They pretty much put all their eggs in one basket in terms of the offseason, and it kind of went back in their face, right? They failed when it came to acquiring Damian Lillard, and ultimately it was because they just didn't have a good enough package to go ahead and acquire Damian Lillard. Now the question is, maybe they can recover here, maybe they can trade for Jrue Holiday, and ultimately I actually really like Jrue Holiday's fit with Miami. Think of the perimeter defense that they would look like with him, Kyle Lowry, Jimmy Butler, Caleb Martin, etc., etc. And then you have Bam Adebayo as your backline defender. That could be a really, really fun defensive nucleus. The offense would have tons of question marks. And, you know, with Gabe Vincent and Max Strus being off the team, you sort of question the shooting department. And ultimately, that's where I wonder what the hell happens. If you think about what this Heat team needed was an all-around creator, a guy who can, you know, kind of galvanize their offense. And ultimately, Dame was that guy. Dame could have been that guy, but he's not going to be that guy anymore for them. They also have to find out what their rotation is when you lose a guy like Max Strus and when you lose a guy like Gabe Vincent. Maybe they'll be able to like turn out Haywood Highsmith and Nikola Jovic into real rotation players this season, but ultimately, that's a big question for Miami in this offseason now and in this season moving forward. You can bank on Miami being able to do that. I think there is no better team that you can trust to find rotational players to figure it out than the Miami Heat, because they have Eric Spoelstra, they have Pat Riley, they have two great leaders in Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. There is a world in which the Miami Heat survive all of this. That being said, it's still a failure that they didn't acquire Damian Lillard, and it's going to look really, really bad. And also, it's tough because not only did they not trade for Damian Lillard and they weren't able to acquire Damian Lillard, but he went to a direct competitor. They made another team in the East that much more dominant. It is Boston, it is Milwaukee, and then after that, after a tier, you would say, you know, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Miami, etc. And I wonder how Miami kind of counteracts this. Maybe the Jrue Holiday trade is something that happens. Maybe something else happens along the road. Maybe they go after James Harden. Who knows? I'm not sure what the deal is with what Miami would do moving forward, but ultimately they're in a tougher position now that the Dame trade has gone through, and they're not the victors in this situation. When it comes to the Toronto Raptors, there's so much to discuss. We have so much to discuss. First and foremost, I want to say that this 2 weeks of this whirlwind of Damian Lillard might go to the Toronto Raptors, the Toronto Raptors are front runners for Damian Lillard, etc., etc. It sort of took us off of the point of where this franchise was and what the front office needs to do. There have been tons of mishaps. You think about the Kyle Lowry trade and the trade, you know, the Kyle Lowry trade, aka the Kyle Lowry trade deadline. You think of Fred VanVleet deadline. You think of Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby deadlines. Fred VanVleet walking. Kyle Lowry being traded for probably less than what he could have if you traded him at the deadline. There is a lot of situations that the front office has mismanaged over the last couple of years. And it's led them to this situation where they are depleted of talent, where they have 3 unrestricted free agents heading into this summer in Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Gary Trent Jr. It would be mismanagement. It would be malpractice for this team that has a history of letting their free agents walk now over the last couple of years do the same thing this summer. It would be absolutely malpractice. So what do the Raptors have to do, in my opinion? They have to trade Pascal Siakam. That is the first order of business when it comes to what they need to do right now. Ultimately, I think the reasoning for that is simple. The Raptors are in a position where they don't have tons of assets to go out and get another star, or maybe they're not willing enough to go out and get another star. And to be fair, with this Damian Lillard and Giannis situation, it kind of takes those guys out of the market. I don't think Giannis is going to be asking out anytime soon. I don't think Damian Lillard is going to be asking out anytime soon. And ultimately, how long are you going to wait for the Embiid situation to unfold, the SGA situation, the Luka situation, whatever it may be? How long are you going to wait? And ultimately, do you think you can outbid the rest of the NBA for those types of players? I ultimately think you can. OKC will be at the front of the line for that. New Orleans will be at the front of the line for that. Portland now will be at the front of the line for that. And I think it's going to be tough for them to go big fish hunting. What does that mean? Sort of a reset. You can't go into this summer saying, hey, we're going to extend Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Gary Trent Jr. They don't even have the money to do that. So they have to make a decision here. To be fair, they are not in a position of leverage. They are not in a position of power right now to negotiate and get the best offer possible for Pascal Siakam because they have waited too long to do so. He is an expiring contract now. And he's an expiring contract that has given indications to teams that he's not going to be re-signing wherever he gets traded until he figures out what he wants to do in the summer. So ultimately, They are negotiating from a really, really poor position. And I think people are going to be disappointed with what the return is for Pascal Siakam when he inevitably gets traded. There is a scenario where I see them considering this and now extending Pascal Siakam and saying, hey, we've extended him. We now have this window open with these guys. Maybe we move OG Anunoby. But at the same time, that still requires a decision. Some sort of direction has to be picked. If you are keeping Siakam and extending Siakam, it most likely means OG Anunoby, who has wanted a bigger role, who is looking for a massive contract extension this summer, is going to have to go somewhere else. Where that is, you probably could have found out last trade deadline with the offers that were on the table and you didn't take. All of this has snowballed into one momentous decision for the Raptors. What they will do with that is completely up to them. They have consistently gone the opposite direction of what is conventional. Conventional wisdom would have said that they would have traded one of Fred VanVleet or OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam at the deadline, or multiple of those guys at the deadline. They didn't do so. Conventional wisdom would have said that they would have traded Kyle Lowry at the trade deadline. They didn't do so. There is a lot of, the human element in all of this. And I think that's something that we as fans and as people who watch the NBA don't think about often, is the human element. I mean, we're talking about it with the Damian Lillard trade. There is a human element of them thinking, hey, we had a really bad vibe season last year. The Nick Nurse situation, the Fred VanVleet situation, we had a bad vibe team. Things did not go the way we wanted it to. Actually, in fact, things were the opposite of good. Everything went as awfully as possible for the Raptors last year. You sort of tell yourself, hiring a new coach, a developmental coach in Darko Rajakovic, will be able to inject a good vibe onto this team. You don't want to take away from that good vibe by having 3 unrestricted free agents hanging over your head like a cloud for this entire season, because bad vibes will be reintroduced once again. What they do, I am not sure. What they have to do is seemingly obvious. It is trading Pascal Siakam, retooling around OG Anunoby and Scotty Barnes, and then seeing where you can go from there. Because it would be malpractice for this team to continue on this way and have any sort of confidence that they can retain their free agents this summer and continue trying to compete. It just doesn't seem plausible. It doesn't make sense. And ultimately, it makes you question what sort of pressures are being put on this Raptors front office to do things in a certain way. We know for a fact, or at least from what I've heard, there is an immense amount of pressure on this Raptors team to stay competitive. As we know, there is a potential sale of MLSE, of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. The Raptors' valuation plays a huge part in that. Ticket sales, playoff gate, all that stuff is going to be huge in factoring how much this team is going to go to sale for. And ultimately, I think that's why you have this pressure for them to not retool, for them not to reset, for them not to be bad, because they need to be a competitive team and get that playoff revenue. And ultimately, I think that's playing a big factor into their decisions. Now, I'm sure some of you are asking right now, okay, if that was a big factor, why did they not trade for Damian Lillard? I'll go back to that human element and say, I think they probably made their best shot at it. They took their shot, and ultimately Dame wanted to go and play with Giannis Antetokounmpo. That being said, you were in a position where you had to bank on that in the first place because of the Fred situation, because of the Pascal and OG situations that are looming, because of the Lowry situation. You are now in a position where you don't have tons of leverage. You have to succumb to the situation in front of you. And ultimately, it's a poor situation that the Raptors are in. It's a really, really tough situation to navigate for this Raptors front office, and I'm not sure how exactly they do it. Conventionally, they have been a very patient team, a team that takes its time, decides things in a very pragmatic manner. And it just, right now, it doesn't make sense for this team to continue on this way, to continue on with this team going into this season. Media Day is only in a couple days, and there's going to be a lot of questions for Masai Ujiri, for Bobby Webster, for the rest of the Raptors, maybe even coaching staff and players. to answer for what this team is going to look like this year. Because ultimately, I don't think it can be this. So that's it. That's where the Raptors are at. They are not in an ideal situation, I would say. It's tough to say that they're in an ideal situation. And now they're in an Eastern Conference that is very, very top heavy between the Bucks, who now have Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo, Boston, who has one of the deepest teams in the NBA. Miami is always going to be kicking. Philadelphia, obviously, depending on the James Harden situation. Cleveland is developing and growing. The Knicks aren't going away anytime soon. Teams like Atlanta and Indiana have gotten better this summer. You have to question where the Raptors stand in the Eastern Conference and the bigger NBA. And if that answer comes away saying middling, then maybe you're doing something wrong. So that's all I've got. Damian Lillard is officially a member of the Milwaukee Bucks. It is still absolutely insane to think about that. I can't wait to watch it. It's going to be must-watch cinematic basketball, genuinely. It's going to be incredibly entertaining. The Blazers are going to be entertaining. I think the Suns equally will be entertaining to watch. And as for the Raptors and Heat, we'll see how the ripple effects work. But thank you very much for tapping in, ladies and gentlemen. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much. Subscribe, like, comment, whatever you guys want to do. We will be tapped in all year for SDPN, for NBA coverage, and I got you guys. So thank you very much. Peace.